say thank you to all of you who have joined us this morning for this critical conversation. This is Fortified, and we are having a critical conversation this morning about demand. We have a special guest who's in the room, and we appreciate all of you for joining us. If you're in the metro Atlanta area, you know we are under cloudy and showers and rain. You know, along with joining this conversation, it's a dark type of conversation that we're having this morning, appropriate for our weather. But definitely want to appreciate you being in the space this morning. We're still admitting folk. We will definitely get started in just a second. It's 11:02, and we'll get started in just a second. Want to make sure we get everyone in. Thank you for our regulars who are joining us today. Glad to see you in this space. Attorney Martin, appreciate you. I look at Shay Marlowe is joining us. Thank you guys so much for being in this space. We were just having a conversation a few minutes ago about how we're going to continue to try to engage. Want to let you know that if you want to share this information next week, this conversation will be on the IHTI website in case you want to share it with someone. So we can keep this information going. It's too important for us to keep it to ourselves. My name is DeAndre Marshall. I greet you as the program director and training director for the International Human Trafficking Institute. We are located in Metro Atlanta. We are part of the National Center for Civil and Human Rights. So my little cheap plug for them today is that they are open and they are social distancing. So if you all are looking for somewhere to go and somewhere to be safe, they are definitely doing that. So I want to make sure that I say that they're located next to the Coca-Cola building. And I tell you, it's a place that once you visit, you'll want to go back again because you can't see everything in one visit. So we are going to go ahead and get started. Our moderator today is none other than Ronald Mazik. I tell you guys, if I had a son, if I had to have a son, I would want him to be a mirror image of Ronald. He is not only a great person, he's an excellent husband, and he's a great father. Sometimes I see his kids jump in on our Zooms and just know that he is so patient and compassionate with them. So thank you for joining us. And then thank you to Ronald for being our moderator today. Now, you know, oftentimes when we talk about Fortified, we talk about having these critical conversations with men. And so we don't want to negate the fact that we have women who have joined us today, and we appreciate you for being in the space because we never know. You may share this information with a male person in your life. And so we appreciate you for being here. And I am going to now go behind the screen. Please mute all of your systems so that we won't have any interference. And I'm going to turn this over to Ron.
All right. Good morning. Good morning. Hopefully everyone can hear me. DeAndre, thank you as always for the gracious introduction. Don't worry about the kids popping in today. I have sent them away with the grandparents this morning. So we have the space to ourselves. I am going to go ahead and share my screen because I know that Saturday morning is precious real estate from a time standpoint. And we do thank you for giving us some of that and being here with us. And we want to respect your time. So as we jump right in, we have been running this series now since the beginning of the year. And as DeAndre mentioned, it is called Fortified. And today we're going to talk about, you know, something that is directly related to the purpose of IHTI, and that's human trafficking. And today we're going to focus specifically on the demand. As DeAndre mentioned, my name is Ronald Mazik. My wife and I are founders of a consulting operation called ClearPath Creations, and this is a partnership that we've been working with IHTI, and it's really been phenomenal to be a part of. In my day role, I work at the Georgia Institute of Technology as the Associate Dean and Director of the Office of Student Integrity. And so this is really passion work for me. I'm really, really excited today to have with us someone who, just in a brief time we've had a chance to engage. I think it has been a very deep, just connecting around these issues. And I have found to be an expert on this, and that is Peter Quiliotine. And yes, I did practice that last name. I think I got it right today, but he is the coordinator for modeling equality and a number of other things, which he'll have an opportunity to share with you as we jump into our conversation today. Before we get started, we always like to provide a disclaimer. I can tell from our experience with this particular series, many of you are experts in your own right in a lot of the topics that we've been covering. And so this may not be as applicable to you, but maybe it is. And for those of you who aren't experts or you don't practice in this area and you're really here to just learn more, we want to make sure that you know that this is a safe space. All right. We know that the topics that we're going to cover can be sensitive in nature. Some, have included profanity. I don't know, maybe this is such an intense topic that someone feels the need to express themselves in that way. And if that's the case, we want to make sure, again, that this is a safe space for you to express yourself. If for whatever reason you do find yourself feeling uncomfortable, it's all right to disengage. You can exit the group. And then you can communicate with us. You can contact us offline and let us know exactly what it is, either that triggered you or you felt it made you uncomfortable. And, maybe we can provide you some resources to help you address it, or we can speak to you in that moment and help you address it as well. Ground rules for today, very simple. We want to make sure that we're practicing respect all around, respect for those who are speaking. We're going to practice what my wife refers to as active listening. All right. So I've learned a lot about that. And then the very last one, which I think is extremely important, is we want to engage. This is a dialogue. Again, I mentioned that many of you are experts in your own right, and I'm sure that you have, some very rich information to add to this conversation. So one of the things, ironically, that we really haven't had an opportunity to do in these spaces is talk about IHTI. We had the great idea, DeAndre had the great idea to create a series talking about addressing male messaging and, addressing some of the more societal influences that could become kind of core, core causes of human trafficking as it exists. But we haven't really talked about IHTI. And so I really just wanted to very briefly talk about what IHTI is and the mission. And I know DeAndre hasn't gone too far because I'm going to pull her back in here in a second. But, the mission, we basically want to leverage the resources to create a global movement to end trafficking of persons of all kinds, right? And, I will say for me, this has been a learning experience, a growth opportunity just to learn more about human trafficking in general. And IHTI's goals, which is to traffic-proof vulnerable people, prevent buyer demand, and I'm not going to steal any of Peter's thunder because we're going to be talking about demand, but also to change consumer demand. And when you read these, you'll see why a conversation like this is really so central to IHTI's overall focus. But I see DeAndre's cut her camera back on. I want to bring her in to go ahead and speak a little bit more about IHTI.
Yeah, so thank you, Ronald, for giving us that brief introduction. But I do want to just share a couple of things about the mission of IHTI. So 3 years ago, 4 years ago, right at the point of the Super Bowl coming to Atlanta, there were a group of people who came together to form what is now known as the International Human Trafficking Institute under the direction of the executive director at that time, who was Deborah Richardson. Deborah had done this work for over 20 years. So she and Peter were running hand in hand to bring information to the public about human trafficking. But hers started as she sat in a courtroom watching a girl be shackled and being charged with child prostitution. And from that, a lot of things were created. And fast forward to the Super Bowl coming to Atlanta, the inception and the facilitation of IHTI came to existence. And so I did say at the beginning that we are part of the National Center for Civil and Human Rights. And we are one of two institutes that operate underneath the center. And what we have been doing over the last 3 years is talking to people in community about human trafficking so that people would understand what human trafficking was. So not only did we talk about sex trafficking, for 3 years now, we have been training people to know what labor trafficking looks like as well. Because the thought is that until people understand what is existing in our communities, they won't be able to have a voice about eradicating it. And so we have continued to train with the goal of reaching 50,000 persons across Georgia to understand human trafficking. Well, at the point of the pandemic, we pivoted like most organizations, business companies, most folk who went virtual. So we went virtual and we had a goal of that 50,000. We are probably about 3,000 people away from reaching the goal of communicating this message to 50,000 people. It's moved from training in Atlanta. We trained all across Georgia now, and we have trained all across the country and in other countries. So, the message has been clear that we wanted folk to learn something. We wanted folk to see something with the message, and then we wanted people to do something. So to be able to become proactive about bringing an end to human trafficking. So that has been our message. June will be our 3-year target date. And we look forward to reaching that 50,000 and to do whatever the center says is appropriate for this message to continue to go forward. So that's who we are. That's what we've been doing. And one of the ways that we've done this is through the critical conversations, the one that we're having now. That this is just a mechanism. We have done simulations, an eye-opening experience to give people an opportunity to see firsthand, what this looks like. And so, we appreciate all of our followers, people who have joined us. This is our last critical conversation for Fortified until, we hear something different. But we figured this was the best way to bring closure to Fortified, is to have an expert like Peter come in and talk about what the root of this is. Besides this being big business, this is about demand. If we don't have demand, we don't have a problem. Our kids are safe, but because there is and continues to be demand, we have to continue to spread the message. So Ronald, there you have it.
DeAndre, thank you so much. And, I think that that's so important, that we really highlight, exactly what IHCI was created to do, as you mentioned, as we kind of bring closure to the Fortified series. And so with that, we'll go ahead and move forward. And we'll talk about, again, how IHTI's central message relates to sex trafficking. So what is sex trafficking? Very, very simply, a form of human trafficking. And, I learned that, kind of a subset of human trafficking, but essentially it's slavery, right? It's a form of slavery. And it's defined as the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, obtaining, patronizing, or soliciting of a person for the purpose of commercial sex act, right? And so, there are a lot of things there. And as you can see, when we talk about patronizing or soliciting, we are extending to people who are also attempting to acquire, some sort of commercial sex. So we are going to talk a little bit more about that. And here we go with the see something. So what exactly are we talking about here? And on the other side of this, we're going to bring Peter in to really dive into sharing his expertise with us.
We have an individual who's pled guilty now, and he's looking at a 15-year mandatory minimum. And I've heard from several people who have said that's way too long for someone trying to, just trying to buy sex with a child. Well, with Mr. Gravens during his online chats, he said, I see you have a 12-year-old. I really want a 10-year-old, but I'll take the 12-year-old if I don't have to use condoms and I can take pictures. Before people judge and say, you're being harsh on these guys, you should see what we see.
I was just sick, but it told me this. We have to dig in and fight.
I really believe that most buyers felt like they weren't going to get caught, and I think also that if they did get caught, nothing was going to happen to them.
Shared Hope conducted a study in 2014 of buyers, and we found that 26% of the buyers of commercial sex with kids that did not spend a day in jail. We've got a serious problem of tolerance.
My own ignorance was my biggest barrier. And it wasn't until I became a member of the Governor's Council, it wasn't until I went to the Shared Hope Conference that I understood that even in our own community, we probably have a problem.
Juvenile sex trafficking is recruiting, enticing, harboring, transporting, obtaining, maintaining a minor for commercial sex. Some states are now starting to include purchasing and soliciting. That's to clarify that buyers are part of the crime of sex trafficking.
We think that there are two types of buyers who end up in situations where they're caught for trying to buy a minor. One, we think, is they just want to buy sex, and they don't care if she's 17 or she's 18. And then there are people who are specifically looking for a minor.
We're getting buyers that are doctors, attorneys, from law enforcement, people that make a substantial amount of money, to the guy that just came off the construction site.
My experience was that it was the stereotype that we always hear about, that they have families, that they have careers.
So we've had a physician. We've had an air traffic controller.
Older, younger, married, not married.
The age range of our offenders went from age 17 up to around 60, almost 70 years old.
The only really consistent trend we've seen is that they're male.
A disturbing trend that we found was that the younger the victim, the more money that was offered to have sex with that child.
Some of the buyer cases we've done, we absolutely have found evidence. They've brought tape, guns, zip ties, things along those lines.
There were several times that I was raped in a car and shoved out of a car.
They feel much more comfortable shopping on the internet. They can do it from their workplace. They can do it from their home. There's a large number of men out there that are looking for these girls, knowing that they can abuse them, rob them, rape them, and they're going to get away with it, and they're going to go on to their next victim.
All right, so hopefully everyone was able to see and hear that video, and I'm sure that you have, some thoughts and input you'd like to share. But I would like to bring Peter in to engage in this conversation. And before we get started, Peter, if you would you tell us a little bit about, yourself and the work that you've done, and then we, jump into talking about, the how, this sort of thing could even happen.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Ronald, for having me. And thank you all for joining and participating in this and taking your Saturday morning to do that. My name is Peter Qualiatine, and I work with a group called Modeling Equality. It's a relatively new organization. We work with municipalities around the country to get them to adopt policies and practices that would help end sex trafficking. Now, Modeling Equality is a pretty new group, but I've been working on the issue of commercial sexual exploitation and sex trafficking for about 30 years. Now, 30 years ago, it was a different environment out there. We weren't really talking even about sex trafficking. People were just talking about prostitution. And honestly, when I got involved in this work, I wasn't even thinking about that. I got involved in this work because I was interested in stopping domestic violence. And I was interested in stopping domestic violence because I grew up in a domestic violence household. And I recognized that although my father's violence became a problem for my mother and my siblings and myself, that it was really his problem. His inability to deal with frustration, anxiety, disappointment, and his feelings of entitlement to take it out sideways on the people around him, on the people who loved him, and on the people who he loved. And so as I got older, I started to recognize it wasn't happening just in my household, but it was happening in lots of households. And when it happened, it was at the hands of men. Most men don't do these types of things, but when they're done by men. So as I got older still, things happened, like I started learning about sexual assaults, and people that I know started to talk to me about the sexual abuse they experienced as kids. And I saw that there was a problem with the hearts of men. And that in fact, we needed to actively engage men and boys to help create a culture where men's violence didn't happen. So I started working and doing middle school and high school prevention work on dating violence and sexual assaults and sexual harassment. And if I could go back and ask my younger self, what about sex trafficking and prostitution? I would look at myself from the future and say, what are you talking about? I thought of it as something really different. And it wasn't really until I met and worked with survivors, with people, with women, especially, that had been in the life of prostitution, who had gotten out, and who, when I heard their stories, it really turned things around for me, the way I understood the issue. Because how did they get involved in the life? Well, you've got it up here, Ronald. It was through physical force, it was through threats, it was through psychological manipulation, fraud, coercion, and other actions, starting when they were young, when they were vulnerable. I met them when they were older, but they entered the commercial sex industry when they were teenagers. They experienced violence at the hands of their pimps, violence at the hands of their buyers. Many of them developed chemical dependency in order to cope with the life of violence. It was really difficult to get out. If they did, they suffered from PTSD. They had barriers to employment. They had prison records. Like, there was just so much that was wrong with this. And I really started to look at it as not kind of like a victimless crime anymore, but as another kind of system of what was primarily men's violence against women and children, and sometimes other men, and sometimes trans people, trans women and girls especially. But that I started to look at the purchase of commercial sex as a form of sexual misconduct at best, and as an abuse of power, and recognized that it was important to tackle that issue in order to help change the culture, to stop not just these forms of commercial sexual exploitation, but all forms of men's violence. And Ronald and I were talking earlier, about this work to engage men and this work on promoting healthy masculinities, because we hear a lot about toxic masculinities and how not to be, but what is it really to kind of be a full man with a full range of emotions, who takes care of himself and the people around him and his community. And so this is the how, and I think you've described it really accurately about how people get caught up in the life of prostitution. How is it that buyers end up in a position where they're buying sex is also largely about their environment and the culture around him. And so one of my big questions and the motivating factors in my work is, how do we build a culture where men don't buy sex, and where men embrace mutual relationships that aren't based on violence, power, abuse, and exploitation? And so this has been the focus of my career. In 1995, I started one of the first sex buyer education programs in the country for men who are arrested as sex buyers in Portland, Oregon. We put them through a course, right? Later on, I went on to work with both youth and adults who had been exploited in systems of sex trafficking. And then went on to develop in Seattle a program that was 10 weeks long that worked with buyers of commercial sex. I left Seattle a couple of years ago and moved to Western Massachusetts, where I started modeling equality, where I'm teaching others around the country about how to approach this problem in a holistic way, so that we can get exit services for people who are exploited, we can have accountability for those who are choosing to exploit, and we can change the culture so people in the future aren't put in these situations. So that's a little bit of my background and a little bit about it, how it ties into this how of the exploitation happens.
No, that's phenomenal. Thank you for sharing that. And I do want this to be as much of a dialogue as it can be. I can kind of give you spoiler alert. The next slide is going to be about the why. Why this happens. But while we're on the how, are there any questions from our participants, or any comments? Again, I know some of you may be professionals in this field as well, and you may want to share some of your expertise. But I want to open the floor for you to do that. So you can just unmute yourself. If you're putting things in the chat, I cannot see them. So DeAndre, if you're there and you're listening, if there are any comments in the chat that can be read off, let me know.
The chat is clear.
Chat is clear? Okay.
Yep.
So again, yeah, if anyone wants to unmute themselves and jump into the conversation, again, the floor is open. You'll get more times, of course, opportunities to do that. But I want to make sure that we're keeping this as much of a dialogue as we can. All right. Seeing no takers, I'm going to move us along. And as I mentioned, we're going to, talk about the why, what leads to sex trafficking. And I think, as Peter kind of illustrated in his introduction and talking about the how that the two are connected. But I'm wondering, Peter, if when you see the why and some of the prompts here, if they kind of elicit some additional thoughts as terms of why this happens.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, the biggest reason about the why is the demand. And I think that DeAndre said this really great earlier, right? If the demand wasn't there, then the prostitution and sex trafficking wouldn't be there. So that's really the key. And it's due to a lack of education and awareness, certainly. And if you look at like the things that make somebody vulnerable to exploitation, there are things like poverty. If we look at race and ethnicity, that was where I was working in Seattle. If we looked at the under 18s who were commercially sexually exploited in systems of prostitution, 60% of them were African-American girls in a community that was less than 10% African-American. When we look at the buyers, they were over 80% white, making $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year and up. And so it's absolutely about kind of vulnerability and privilege, about folks who have limited resources and folks who have a lot more resources and feel entitled to exploit, right? So those buyers felt entitled to pay for sex. And so I think that those are some really key reasons why this exists. And again, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists in a society where a lot of men are growing up with very dangerous ideas about what masculinity means, right? That it means power over other people, that it means you need to be dominant in all your relationships. You can't have any emotions except for anger and pride, right? And that your identity gets tied up in dominance, in dominating other people. And why? Because you're afraid inside. You're afraid of equality. You're afraid of the kind of really other people having power in the world. And so we really need to create a world where our boys are raised with more complete notions of what it means to be a human being in the world, and what it means to be a man in the world. I think one of the bottom lines too is the last thing you got listed on your slide in terms of why. It's the profit. If there was, and again, this links back to the demand, right? If there was no demand, there would be no profit to be made. There would be no pimps and traffickers that were willing to exploit others in this manner, because there would be no money to be made, because there would be no demand. And so it's that the demand driving the third-party exploitation, because there aren't a lot of people that would willingly engage in this, right? And so the demand is going to be met by people, vulnerable people, who are pushed into this by folks who are focused on that, on making that profit. And so we need to take a look at kind of like all three of these groups in terms of commercial sexual exploitation, sex trafficking, how it happens and what to do about it. We need to look at the vulnerable folks who are being exploited. We need to look at the pimps and traffickers who are looking to profit from the exploitation, third-party exploitation of those folks. And we need to look at the people, primarily men, almost exclusively men, who feel entitled to pay for sexual access to the bodies of other people, that drive that system of third-party exploitation as well. So those are really the three legs of the stool that we need to take a look at when we're dealing with issues like this.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'll tell you, one of the things that we've been able to do, I think rather successfully in this Fortified series, is really just bring like a personal touch to it. So, as a father of three boys, and a girl, this impacts me just in multiple ways, right? And so when we talk about education, just in terms of where, my focus area is really around the education and, primarily K through 12 and college students, but you don't realize how much people don't know, right? They just don't know, or they don't have access to the information. And I think that a series like this, at its best, will hopefully, try to fill a void or address a need in that area that, I'm hoping people like my sons and my daughter will have access to because ultimately they're going to be in spaces where these things impact them. They'll have decisions to make. We all, as parents, if any of you and the participants are parents, then your job is to try to create a whole, like a complete individual, right? And then send them out into the world to be productive members of society. And you want them to be healthy, and you want them to engage and interact with other healthy people. So it really speaks to kind of the broader societal issue that we really have to address, some of the more systemic things. And I think that, this in an hour, we know we're never going to get to all of it. But these are meant to be the starting points of a conversation, to be kind of the kickoff, the launch point, where you can learn some of the bullet points, some of the key things. You take it, and then you continue to expand your knowledge about a particular area. Again, I want to, allow this to be a dialogue. Peter is providing a lot of great information. Are there any questions at this time, or anyone who wants to unmute themselves and share their thoughts?
I see a couple of questions in the chat box here.
Okay.
One of them says, IHTI is one of the first organizations that educated me about the local fight against sex trafficking. What are some other local or national resources that we can share with those we know in and outside of Georgia? Well, I know you all know more about what's going on inside of Georgia than I do, but I can tell you in terms of national networks, World Without Exploitation, or World We, is a pretty good resource just in terms of being able to learn what's going on all over the country. It's an organization that I was a part of founding, and continue to be impressed by the work that they're doing. And DeAndre and Ronald, you might have some better ideas about what's going on in and around Georgia and Atlanta.
So
DeAndre's unmuted.
So one of the organizations, Shay Marlowe, is one of our collaborative partners, but another collaborative partner that we have worked with in the past was Men Stopping Violence. And yeah, so they have joined us. I mean, they have done some work with us and talking about pornography and, the intersection between that and demand and buyers and just sexual exploitation. And so we have a couple of things around that. And I think that they are a good resource for men in particular, because that's their wheelhouse, and talking to men. And so, yeah, Shay, that would be one of the organizations that I know of specifically. I'm always interested in, men who are working with younger men, because I really feel like if we can get a grasp on this and begin to educate, younger men, then, we can put a different twist or spin on this so that they understand the damage that they do. So that's just my input around that part about other organizations.
Yeah, well, there's if you're looking specifically at that men's accountability piece, nationally, there's a group in DC called Men Can Stop Rape that does a lot of great work. And also there's a group called North American Men Engage that is a network of men who are active working on engaging men and boys to stop gender-based violence. And they're connected to a bigger group called Global Men Engage, because this is an issue that's global, right? That it's happening everywhere. And so there's a lot of great work around men's accountability that's being done. And those are a few places that you can get specifics about that.
Another place that I would add in there is, if there are any students on the call, or, I know that this is recorded and it's going to be shared in certain circles. If you're a college university student, check with your college or university and organizations on campus. I know when I was at Georgia State, I advised an organization called Men in Violence Prevention. And we did some work with Men Stopping Violence as well. And so we were able to, through collaboration, do some things to kind of, again, address some of the things we're talking about. And if if you are a student, whether it be K through 12 or, a college university, if there is not an organization on your campus, that is a great window of opportunity for you to get involved, find an administrator or faculty, teacher who's willing to support, and advise an organization and create one. And I think that you'll find that there are a number of resources within the community that will be willing to partner and support you. Are there any other questions in the chat?
I see that there was a question about mental illness, and does mental illness play a role in demand? And the answer is really no, that it's much more about normative, the norms around masculinity and entitlement. Interesting story. In Seattle, several years ago, they started focusing on the buyers of 15-year-olds, right? So they were doing sting operations where the detective would pretend on the internet to be 15 years old. And when the buyer showed up, they would arrest him, and then they would charge him with commercial sexual abuse of a minor, which was what the law was in Washington State. And then he would go to a sex offender treatment provider to have an assessment to see if he was deviant. And so several months later, after they had started arresting a lot of these guys, I went to speak at one of their conferences of the sex offender treatment providers. And when I got there, I expected to find a lot of people that I had a lot in common with. But in fact, most of the providers who'd been doing the assessments were angry. And they said, why are you arresting these guys? They're all testing as not deviant. You're arresting the wrong guys. Now, to me, they were still trying to buy sex from 15-year-olds, right? But I think what it spoke to is that in their minds, they weren't pedophiles. In their minds, they thought that this was okay to do because this person wasn't a 15-year-old. She was a prostitute, right? And so he was entitled to pay her for sex. He didn't think about or care about her identity. Part of the reason he looked at this as an acceptable thing was because this person was in prostitution, right? And so I think that we need to be able to look at this historically has been a sort of normative behavior that men, even if we don't buy sex, feel like we're entitled to do this. And there's this illusion that the person who's exploited is there by choice. When in fact, what we know is that it's not a free choice for the vast majority of people who are exploited, and that the buyers themselves can't possibly know if it's a choice, right? So when the men first come to me, before we go into the group class, I always meet with them a couple times as individuals. And one of the things I ask them is, suppose you pick somebody up on the street or on the internet and she's 15 years old, and you ask her, how old are you? What will she say? And the guys always say, well, she'll say she's 18, or she'll say she's 21. And so I say, and if she has a pimp and you say to her, do you have a pimp? What will she say? And they'll say, well, she'll say she doesn't. And if you ask her, does she like what she does? What is she going to say? Even if it's the last thing that she wants to do that night. And he's going to say, well, she'll say she likes what she does. It's called a trick for a reason. It's called a trick because he's paying for the illusion of consent, for the illusion of mutuality, for the illusion that she actually wants to be doing whatever it is she's doing. But he's in fact paying to not hear about her reality, not hear about her lived experience. Because if she told the truth, then it would break through this whole illusion he has about what this transaction is about, right? And so it's not so much about mental illness, it's about a societal illness. Right. And it's about this, and so the answers to it are working both with the individuals who feel entitled to exploit and in the society through our communities, through our relationships, in order to help change the world around those that feel entitled to exploit.
Right. It sounds like what you're saying is that when they know the truth, it forces them to confront the humanity of the other person, through knowing their reality, and that fantasy that they, were trying to purchase is eliminated to a
That's
certain
exactly
extent.
right. And it's about really valuing compassion and empathy, and elevating those as values that are important to have in our communities, right? And so building communities where that's what we respect and value, and where we value equality, respect, mutuality. These are the things that I think that we really need to work on valuing in our communities and in our families in order to help stop not just this, but all kinds of exploitation.
Absolutely. We're doing pretty good with time on my check here. Do we have any other questions there? I see the chat, lighting up orange, but if I open it, I can't see the screen. So, DeAndre, do you see anything there?
Oh yeah, it was just me giving the audience a comment about Terry Crews and how he leaned into what Peter just shared with us about, the inhumane or the humanity of the women who are involved in exploitation. He and Mike Tyson did a piece. I don't know, Peter, if you've seen it, but they talked about how in like certain settings, they didn't want the female to open her mouth to talk. They didn't want her to say anything because then it made her appear human. And, the thing for this type of behavior is so that they can't, I don't want to hear your business. I don't want to hear about your children. I don't want to hear anything. I just want you to do what I want you to do. So,
Yeah, so that is really about power and control, right? That's really about, I don't want you you are an object, you're dehumanized, and my value is that I have dominance and I can control this situation. And we don't just need to look at systems of prostitution where men pay to dominate others, right? Like I asked a guy once about if he knew had any insight into why he bought sex. He said, yeah, I buy sex because the only thing I'm more afraid of than intimacy is rejection.
Mm.
Right? So he didn't want a relationship because he was afraid of being rejected, and he was afraid of intimacy. And so he did this, engaged in sex buying, right, as an alternative to that. And I think that that's something that we see, is that boys and men, many of us are raised with this idea that we can meet our relational needs through non-relational sex. But that's just not true. You cannot meet non-relational needs through non-relational sex. But I think what the culture tells men is that, yes, you can. All you need to do is have sex and then everything will feel okay, right? Then you'll feel better about yourself as a man. You can go and tell your buddies about it, or lie to your buddies about it and give them a high five, and then it's all good in the world. And I think the reality is that, having worked with thousands of sex buyers over the course of my career, is that it's not even sexual needs that they're trying to meet. For most, they have a lack of social support. They don't know who they are. And they're acting out in this way that's been culturally condoned. It's been sanctioned, right? Because they can. And so being able to change the culture, I think, is really key in terms of changing the behavior of men who feel entitled to exploit.
Absolutely. And I think that what you just shared is a great transition to the next slide. I would say keep the questions coming, but we do want to continue on with the dialogue. But we talked about the how, we talked about the why, and how these things could even exist, in our society. I think it's probably just as important as we talk about, what do we do? Like, what can we do? So that's the question, Peter. What do we do?
Well, this is the $1 million question, really, isn't it? How do we create a safer world? I wish I had the magic words that could just do it and make it happen. And I think that it's a complicated answer, because it has to happen on a bunch of different levels. It's not just about working with individuals, but recognizing that we all have a role to play in this. One of the things that we used to ask the men after they finished the class that we did for sex buyers is how they were going to live their lives differently based on their participation in the class. What would they do differently? And this one guy wrote in, I'm going to raise my son differently because I don't want him to be angry and depressed all the time like I am. And to me, this man who, you might think that the primary goal with educating him was to get him to not buy sex anymore and to reduce demand that way. But for me, as important is who he's going to be when he walks back into the world. And how is he going to raise his son? How is he going to talk to his friends out there in the world? How is he going to talk to the women in his life? How is he going to be as an agent, as an actor in the world, having come through this experience? And I think that how do we create a safer world? It's about doing it together. And at the risk of sounding corny, I think we need to love each other, each one, right? That if we look at forms of exploitation like this, it's about othering, and it's about feeling entitled to exploit this other, having power over the other. And when we love each other, it's more about sharing power with the other. It's about mutuality, power with, respect for, and together we can create, what Dr. King called beloved community. Right, where we're working together to create social justice and equality. And so how do we create a safer world? We do it together, and we do it through love and healthy modes of being that aren't based on the subordination of groups of others, but in fact are about elevating everybody, because it's all got to happen with us together. And how does it happen? Is your second point there, Ronald, is accountability. Like, what does accountability to look like? And I think that there's been a lot of talk in the past couple of years with the Me Too movement and with Black Lives Matter about accountability and about privilege. And I think that for me, privilege means that where I have it, I recognize that I've got blind spots. And so I need to listen to people who have lived experience in the areas that I got blind spots. And so that's meant to me is, I don't know what it means to be a woman in the world. I don't, when I walk down the street, I don't worry about being sexually assaulted. If I go into a bar club to have a drink, I don't put it down and then look back at it a minute later and say, oh, somebody might have put something in that, I'm not going to drink it. When I was dating, I never went on a date and was invited up to have tea at the end of the night and thought to myself, well, maybe I shouldn't go into that situation because I don't know what's going to go on in there. That's the privilege that I move through the world with. And so how do I learn about that? By listening to my sisters, right? Listening to those that have lived experience in that area who tell me about what it's like when they walk down the street and somebody says, hey, baby, whatever. Because that doesn't happen to me. I'm a 6'5", 225-pound man, and I walk through the world and people don't talk about my body or tell me to smile or tell me they've got a little of what I need or I want or whatever. Like it doesn't happen that way with me. When my taillight is out and I'm driving down the street and I see a cop in my rearview mirror, I'm not worried that they're going to pull me over and that it's going to go down some way that is going to leave me injured or dead. Right? The worst that I think is going to happen is I'm going to say, oh, sorry, officer, give me the fix-it ticket and I'll go get a new bulb for my taillight. Right? It's a different world that we move through. And so what accountability looks like is allying ourselves with those in the positions of less power. And there are none that are in positions of less power than those who are commercially sexually exploited. Right? Those are people who, because of gender, because of race, because of poverty, because of a lot of other reasons, have been incredibly vulnerable to this type of exploitation. And they have a lived experience that we need to listen to. And so being able to listen to and be accountable to survivors is so important in doing this work. I found that out personally because, when you get into a room with these guys, the sex buyers, and you start hearing things from their perspective, you start having a lot more compassion for them. And that's good to a certain extent. But you can't forget about the person that's been exploited, right? Because we all know hurt people hurt people. And so these guys are hurt. They need to heal. But there's no way that we can lose sight of the fact that they've, instead of dealing with their own hurt, they've in fact amplified it, projected it, and targeted others, and then enacted it on others. And that sort of entitlement is what we need to take on. And so accountability to survivors looks like you're answerable. I bring a full accounting of what I do to the people who are the most exploited in those positions and say, how am I doing? Is this working? Is this going to put you at further harm, or is this going to help be a part of the solution? And it looks clunky, right? It looks clunky because none of us have all the answers. And we're all works in progress. My wife's not here right now. If she was, she would hop on this call and she would tell you that I am a work in progress, and I still have my growing edges and my own ways that I enact privilege in our relationship, and that's but she knows I'm working on it, right? And so having a sense of humor can help, and really recognizing that kind of we're all in this together, and not getting so defensive, but recognize that we need to be a part of this bigger change that we want to see in the world, and figuring out the small and big ways that we can do that. And to me, that's how we create a safer world, and that's what accountability looks like.
No, thank you for that, Peter. As you were kind of going through that, I was processing it. It's really illuminating as I, teach my daughter in particular certain things, or as I try to create safe spaces for her, how much of that involves teaching her how to interact and keep herself safe from men, right?
Yeah.
And as I teach my sons, how much of it involves not being the kind of men that would ever make a woman feel threatened or that you would harm them in a particular way. And you don't really think about like how significant, how core to raising children something like that could be, because ultimately, we create the adults that go on and either combat these types of things or potentially perpetrate these type of behaviors. So I really do feel a very personal connection to the things that you're sharing. I did see the orange chat box glowing here. So hopefully those are some questions that we're able to address. DeAndre?
Yeah, those were just me, jumping in to amen Peter about the things that he was sharing with us. I mean, he has given us such good information to walk away with, to share with others. His expertise is phenomenal. And I'm just so grateful to have had him in this space. So I was just like, highlighting some of the things he was saying so that people would have some things to walk away with. And so that's where our buzz was. Yeah.
That's what the buzz was. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think that's great. I'm definitely over here taking mental highlights, because what I always do with these is I have a recap in my own house with my kids about the things that I train on. It would seem a little weird to, go out in the world and train everybody else and then not share the information with your own children, right?
Absolutely.
So I don't ever want to be found guilty of that. So we talk about these things. And, when I promote things like this on social media, one of the things I always say is no topic or some topics are just too important to be taboo. Right. And that's as much for the audience that we're trying to draw in as it is for myself and my family. Like, these topics can't be taboo. So, I would really challenge you all, like in the spaces that you occupy, for those of you who are participating on the call, to really, engage in these conversations, and, definitely with the groups that you advise or that you work with, but in your own personal spaces as well. One of the things that Peter talked about, saying that his wife wasn't there, but if she was, she would tell you that he's a work in progress. My wife would echo those sentiments, right? So I think that that's something that we all have in common. But I think it's also reflective of the work that we have to do as a broader society, whether it's community or, the nation, the world, we're all a work in progress, right? And so when you just extend the whole concept of relationship beyond just the your partner, your husband, wife, your children, parent-children relationship, and you and your coworkers, you and the group you advise, and just continue to view the concept of relationship from a broad lens, it really starts to show you that there's no limit to the spaces that you can do this work. And it's going to take, consistent work in all of those spaces to have a substantial impact over time.
Yeah.
So, those are, again, these are the things that I'm walking away, because I get just as much from, facilitating these conversations as I think anyone does. And I know we're making real good time today. I think we get some good content. Again, wanting it to be as much of a dialogue as possible. Is there anyone who would like to come off mute and either talk about the information that's been shared today, whether it's ask additional questions or make comments, or maybe share something that we haven't covered today that you think would be beneficial for everyone?
So
Hey, good morning, everyone.
Oh, okay, come on.
Hey, good morning. Good morning, DeAndre. This is Shay. Just want to check in and say kudos to you, Ronald. Thank you guys so much. Peter, awesome experience today. Love being a part of it. I actually just saw the post this morning. Was like, let me jump on and learn something new. And I'm so grateful for the three of you for doing this today. So just want to say thank you.
Thanks, Shay. Thank you for your support.
Thank you. Thank you for letting us know that day of marketing works. Appreciate that. I'm always curious of when the best time to do something like that is. So I do them all. But day of, I'm glad to hear that you were able to join us, and definitely appreciate that and you for being here.
Thank you all. And I just put my email address in the chat box. So if anybody ever has any follow-up questions or wants to reach out, feel free to do that. Oh, but I do realize I put an extra L in there. So it's Peter at Modeling Equality with one L, not two. But yeah, thanks, Shay, and thank you, Ronald and DeAndre, for organizing this. I'm happy to take more questions in the minute or two that we've got left.
Yeah, the floor is open for questions. We're really, again, we're here to try to provide as much in this short period of time that we can, to try to give you as much content as possible. So throw it in the chat. I see the chat bumped up to 11, so that's something there. And
okay, again, so we just have one of our regulars. She's not only a regular, she's an ambassador. She's out of the country, but Camille just talked about giving us kudos and thank you for excellent presentation and critical information. Thank you. Appreciate you, Camille, for being in this space today. Want to thank all of you guys for coming and joining us for this critical conversation. I did put in the chat about our survey that we'd like for you to fill out and send back. It'll help us to be able to understand what you understand. So as we begin to roll toward that 12 o'clock hour, once again, thank you for joining us. And thank you to Ronald, you guys. This has been several months of Ronald facilitating these critical conversations. I appreciate Ronald. You guys, I started out by saying if I had a son that, Ronald mirrors the son that I would have, and definitely want to take time to thank him for his time and preparing with me to bring these conversations to you. This has not been an easy feat. It's not an easy conversation. Our conversations that we've had over this span since January. But for those of you who have joined us on each critical conversation, John Martin, thank you so much. And others of you who have been here, we appreciate it. We don't take it for granted. And if you want to reach out, you definitely can. Peter.
Yeah.
Qualian team. We listen, man, look, I have to keep you in my wallet for a pull-up next time. You know the business, you know the information, and it was great to have you with us today. And I thank you, Spark, for sending you our way, one of our partners. So if there is nothing else, Ronald.
I just want to say thank you to you, for allowing me the opportunity to participate and to facilitate these conversations. It's been phenomenal. I've enjoyed every step of it. I do think that we'll have an opportunity to continue to work, and address these important issues together moving forward. So I'm excited about continuing to do that. And, for continuing to introduce me to people like Peter. Peter, thank you. Great expertise today. Great expertise. I think, you always find yourself with the exact thing you need when you need it. And in this situation, Peter, that was you. And, I really just want to say kudos to you for jumping in and giving us some of your Saturday. I can be reached at clearpathcreations@gmail.com. I skipped through the slide because I know we're running towards the end of time here. But if you have questions about this, or if you've participated in any of the other dialogues, or if you want to talk about something in general, definitely reach out. Would love to hear from you, and excited to see, what's next. What's on the docket for our next project.
Great, great, great. All righty then. Well, you guys take care. I always say as we close, take care, be safe, be well, and above all, we want you guys to use wisdom.
Thank you. Awesome.
Thank you guys. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.